Hello and welcome to Eavesdropping at the Movies. I'm Mike.
And I'm Jose.
And we're talking about A Quiet Place Part 2.
Yes.
Today. Not A Quiet Place 2. A Quiet Place Part 2. It's one of the many, it's an expanding series. Well, we had...
It's a whole universe, mate.
Yeah, well, we discussed on the first podcast, the first one we loved, but we discussed the possibility of a sequel, and you were saying, well, I don't see why not. And particularly you were saying, I don't see why not have the same family appear in the sequel.
Yes.
And I was saying... I could see a sequel in a universe kind of Cloverfield sense of like these aliens are here on Earth and we go around the world seeing, because the thing in the first one was, there's some in London, there's some in Moscow, and we've just seen this family of 4 people. But no, we catch up with the same family. In fact, we pick up right where the first film left off. So spoilers will be coming up. The basic idea is aliens have come to Earth and they rely on sound. They're all about sound. They hear very, very well. And your whole thing is if you make a single bit of noise, you are going to be hunted down and immediately killed. Which we saw a bit of in the first film, and we see some of in this film. At the end of the first film, this is where spoiler territory for the first film is coming up immediately. John Krasinski's character, who was the dad, and John Krasinski directed and co-wrote the film, has died. And we're left with Emily Blunt, who's the mother of the family, Millicent Simmons, who's a daughter who's hard of hearing, mostly deaf, and Noah Jupe, who's the son, and a little tiny baby who's come along. We pick up with them the moment after they've just found out at the end of the first film how to fight the monsters, which is to use Millicent Simmons' hearing aid to make a very, very high-pitched noise that freaks them out and gives you the chance to shoot them in the head.
Yes. And the son has grown into almost a teenager. So this is meant to happen the next day, but really, he's shut up.
Yeah, absolutely. Like we're sort of, 2.5 years later in real life, and in the film, it's second. Like, we actually see the shot of them, getting out of the den. So it's funny to see them, the kids have grown up so much.
Yes.
But, is what it is.
It's not a problem.
Spoilers for the second film will be coming up, right?
Yes.
So in this film, they're looking for... Well, in this film, they're still trying to survive, and it's about kind of how events happen. So there's a fire they see in the distance, and they head towards it. And that's... there might be someone there. Who knows what's going to happen? There's really no goal at the start, right? It's just... get out of here and keep on surviving. They come across Cillian Murphy, who's a new introduction for this film, who is someone to they used to know, which makes sense, right? Initially, you're like, oh, wait a minute, what are the odds? But actually, they're in the same town. Like, they probably would know someone there.
Yes, of course.
And there's a lot of tropey stuff going on in this film, I would say. And he's very much in the sole survivor. He's lost everybody. He doesn't trust anybody. There's no one's worth saving. And they're going to have to try and get him to help.
And his faith in humanity is restored by a young girl. I mean, really.
Yeah. So, overall, did you have a good time?
I did. So I'm making fun of it because the film really is full of cliches. But, I jumped out of my seat I don't know how many times.
Yeah.
So it really worked on me. I think the film visually is quite beautiful. I was just reading that it was shot on Kodak film. Right? And I was going to say you can tell, though actually I am not very good at telling. Yeah, though, the film has a depth of an image, that I associate with 35. And it's beautifully lit. It's done by Paulie Moran. I think one of the things that I picked up of Wiki, which I think is interesting, is that the cinematographer for the first film was Charlotte Bruce Christensen, and the cinematographer for this film is Polly Morgan. So it's nice to see women, getting this kind of work. It's still kind of relatively unusual, and it's it's a really great job. So I was really glad to see it. There are things about the world depicted that are perplexing to me still. So you know that they're aliens, but are they all over the world? Are they just in North America? We find in this film that they can leap into boats, but actually they're afraid of water and instantly drown.
So, they can't swim, yeah.
Yeah, so have the oceans been some kind of protection to other continents, or is this like a worldwide crisis?
Well, it's not addressed in this film at all whether it's worldwide, but in the first film, although the whole film was American set, there was this, John Krasinski's character's notes that he had on the aliens. They had, like I say, London, Moscow, you definitely know just from the background that they're around. But it's purely background. And in here, not addressed at all. Right. It's still just a purely American crisis as far as this film's concerned. In fact, not just purely American, purely this family. You really get very, very little sense of how it's affected other people for most of the film.
Yes.
It's very insular, very much about how this family can continue to cope.
Yes. It is very much about the nuclear family, which I think is one of the problems with it. So even when the film's world extends, and you eventually get to this island where people are surviving seemingly quite openly, it's still not about the community, and the community does very little, and in fact kind of, much of it is decimated at the end anyway. It really is about this particular family surviving. It's about the nuclear family very much, I think. Which is a very warped view of the world.
Yeah, we were remarking just before we started the podcast on the film's whiteness and general kind of conservatism, and it doesn't come across as like an ideological project. It just comes across as something that has not been questioned at any point.
Yeah.
That this, like you were saying, there's no idea in this film that there are other ways to live.
Yes, really. I mean, so you were saying earlier, and I think it's very relevant to this, that Richard Brody had criticized the first film, saying, I forget what you said it said, but, that...
Well, let me get back to it. Let me just give you the quote. Here we are. So it's a paragraph from Wikipedia on the film's themes and so on. Richard Brody, writing for The New Yorker, criticised A Quiet Place for what he perceived to be the inclusion of conservative and pro-gun themes in the film. He described it as, quote, the antithesis of Get Out, and, quote, both apparently unconscious and conspicuously regressive, and he opined that it, quote, brings to the fore the idealistic elements of gun culture while dramatising the tragic implications that inevitably shadow that idealism.
Yes. And then, ostensibly, John Krasinski said, "Oh well, I didn't intend any of that. I didn't say any of that. The implication being that it's not there." And you mentioned how Jordan Peele had done a similar thing
with Get Out.
And of course, the thing is that just because you don't, a filmmaker doesn't intentionally put there, or an artist doesn't intentionally put something there, doesn't mean that it is not there. That they could be unconsciously reproducing, a lot of social conventions that they take as natural, as a natural way of being, right? And of course, you could make the argument that an artist's function is, not only to represent those ways of being, but to critique and challenge and imagine different ways of being. That's what, truly great artists do, right? And there's definitely none of that here.
No, and I think it's probably worth pointing out that John Krasinski, who, as I said, directed and co-wrote the first film, wrote and directed this alone.
Yes.
So the two guys whose story and screenplay the first film was based on chose not to come back to this. They wanted to do further original things. They didn't want to make a sequel. So it's just John Krasinski behind the screenplay. And, the one kind of alternative, if you like, way of living that the film imagines here is Cillian Murphy's character living alone, having given up on everyone, just trying to go it alone. Like, he doesn't have a nuclear family, he doesn't have anything like that. He's given up on it all. And
they've been killed, so right. He's lost it. So what ultimately happens to him is he finds a reason to live, and the reason to live is the new nuclear family that's come into his life. I know. So this is, I think, where it can be read really. It is a critique of the film. That this is how it imagines the world, and it's almost the only way that it imagines the world. So Cillian Murphy's abject and lost. Why? Because he's lost his family. What gives him hope? A new family and belonging to it. What is Freedom Island or whatever? It's, barbecues, right? Like suburban...
Proper Americana.
Yeah, suburban life kind of, taking place unchecked with... And not just suburban life, it's all white people except for Jamon Hansu,
who's the guy they meet, and the alien comes in, he gets the alien away with his car, and is killed about 5 minutes after you meet him.
Yeah.
And it sounds like such a obvious kind of plain criticism, like the one black guy dies. And it's such a trope in the horror movie, the black guy dies. But the black guy does die in this.
Yeah.
In fact, the moment he turned up, I thought, why wasn't Cillian Murphy's character black, right?
Yes.
Or Asian or something? Like, what would be the problem with that?
Yes.
You know, and it really speaks of kind of corporate, non-questioning casting.
No, but fuck corporate. This is Krasinski's problem. You know, that he can't imagine, you know, an America with like blacks and Latinos and single moms or gay people or whatever. I mean,
I think
he wrote it and he directed it. So
yeah, no, I don't mean to absolve him. I think maybe he like it. Well, I don't know what went into the decision, but I was reading that Brian Tyree Henry was originally cast for Hun Su's role and then didn't take it because there was scheduling. So like the idea you guys in one black actor and replaced him with another black actor for this minor role where he'll die immediately.
Yeah.
When I say corporate, I don't mean like, you know, oh, John Krasinski wanted this, that and the other and they came down like a ton of bricks. It's very possible that you go, well, it's like we're talking about a conservative mindset being reproduced unconsciously.
Yeah.
You just don't think to, you know, that's just what you do. You get Cillian Murphy in.
But is the Cillian Murphy character not meant to be John Krasinski's brother?
Is he his brother? I thought they were...
Well, I could be wrong, but you see, that would make a difference. If he's meant to be the brother, then the character is more understandable, you know. But he need not be the brother. I mean...
If he was, I missed that. Let me just see if I can find... I thought he was like, just a friend.
Well, if he's a friend, then there's no reason why, you know, it was...
Yeah, he's just a friend.
He's just a friend. Well, then you're right, you know. I mean, they could have cast...
Brian
Tyree Henry in that role.
Yeah.
And then I'm sure he would have taken it, right? Like, because, you know, who wants to play Jamon Hansu's role, really? 5 minutes and then you're an alien's lunch.
Yeah. I don't want to be too down on the film because I did really enjoy it and I think it's really functional, good horror thriller stuff. It's less functional than the first film, which I thought was really special. Although part of what made the first one really special was the full audience that did not make a noise after about half an hour.
Yeah.
Really got into it. And the filmmaking remains very, very good.
The film flows and has rhythm and
it understands action set pieces and it understands kind of building tension for wanting to know that. But I do have a problem in that I felt less tension than I did in the first film. In the first film I really felt tension and even fear as to how things would develop and what was going to happen. And
this
here,
is cheaper.
Well, here I felt curiosity. You know, I felt curiosity. And I was emotionally distant from the film when it was doing the same sort of thing. So it has the same technique of splitting up the characters and then cross-cutting between their various action set pieces. And, you know, as one action set piece, something exciting happens, and exciting happen things in another, and so the tension kind of builds across them. That's quite effective and it works, but I felt less involved in it. And I think part of it is that I never felt any sense of danger, actually, that I did in the first film. I didn't expect John Krasinski's character to die in the first film, for instance. And I didn't really know what was going to happen with Emily Blunt giving birth in it. Whereas here, you've got... So, for instance, Millicent Simmons gets on that train. She goes off on her own. She gets on this train and, you know, she makes a bit of a noise. Alien comes in. Is she going to be able to shoot it? And this thing happens where she shoots it, but she doesn't get it, and she's not going to be able to reload the gun in time. She basically gives up and it's like, well, I'm going to hope that it doesn't kill me. And what happens? Cillian Murphy shows up, shoots things from... It's such a trope. You know, shoots it dead and she's safe.
I mean...
Didn't question that was going to happen, right? I didn't feel like, actually, there's a possibility she might die here, of course.
It doesn't trust the audience with information. So, you know, a lot of the biggest scares were really jump scares. Yeah, it was like, you know, something appearing out of nowhere, right? And you going, yeah. Which is like the cheapest kind of scare tactic that you have. You know, and other times it's better. It shows you like something out of focus in the background, yeah. But then it doesn't kind of give you the means to figure out how the character is going to get out of that situation. It doesn't show you, oh, there's the gun, but he can't reach it, or it's kind of a bit more Deus Ex Machina than I think the first film was. The
bit with Cillian Murphy that I just described certainly is. I'm not sure that is entirely true, but I think... so another one that came to mind was when Cillian Murphy and Millicent Simmons are down at the docks, they're looking for the boat, and they're trapped by a load of bandits.
That is, yeah.
And, you know, at the moment that they're surrounded by sort of 7 or 8 of these guys, I thought, well, they're going to call in the aliens. You know, they're going to do it deliberately. That's the only way they can get out of the situation, is to have the aliens come in and take everyone down. And they did, and it worked. But I felt no surprise because it was the obvious way out of that situation.
Yes.
You know. So it's not to say that the film didn't jumping out of nowhere. It seemed quite obvious that they would do that. It's just that I felt no surprise that they did.
There's a lot of jumping, so it's not like, you remember in the first film, the scene where you see the nail, you see Emily Blunt walk down, yeah. I mean, there's an equivalent scene here where at the end, the young girl goes through the window and then you see all the dangers, as she puts her foot down, right? I mean, I kind of prefer that kind of thing because, at least you're aware of what the dangers are, though, of course, what happens is that the film then surprises you with the last one that you didn't expect, right? Instead of actually allowing you, the audience, to kind of, participate. So you have this menu of possible problems, and then she happens to hit one. Whereas, you're given this menu of possible problems, and then she hits something other completely, right?
I mean, I do know what you mean. I would say, actually, though, the equivalent of that nail in the stair in this film would be the towel on the handle. So when they get into that kind of disused factory where Cillian Murphy lives, and they join him, he's got this sort of... It's like a vault, I guess, or it would have been like a burner or something when it was being used. And they can hide inside it, and there's this huge steel door, and you can close it, and it locks. So to prevent it from locking and from making noise, there's this towel put on the locking mechanism so the handle doesn't hit it. And you see that a few times, as you did with the nail in the first film. You saw it a few times of people not stepping on it. And eventually the towel ain't going to be there. Someone's going to get locked in this thing. Same way that I knew in the first film that it was quite obvious someone's going to step on this nail eventually, and what's going to happen. I think that's the equivalent, and I think it mostly works, except for the fact that it's the son who gets locked in there with the baby, and they've got this limited oxygen supply, and at no point did I think that they were going to kill the baby. You know what I mean? No tension in that whatsoever, because even though they keep on catching up with him, he's running out of oxygen, the baby's crying and so on, there's a monster after them, you never feel like they're in real danger, because they could not possibly kill the baby. It's ridiculous. It's even more ridiculous than killing the dogs in Cruella. They just would not do it.
That's where the film cheats, because, at least in the first film, all the family was in danger, the father dies, right? In this film, all the family is in danger, and not only do none of them die, but actually, the Cillian Murphy character just, it doesn't die, right? So, the closest of a protagonist that they get to actually kind of die and thus be a danger is really the Jamon Hanso character, right?
Yeah.
Because all the others are basically extras. So it's kind of a bit cheap, actually. I think they should have, eaten the baby.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
baby for lunch. It's true.
That's the ultimate problem that the film has, is I think it's intelligently filmed and edited, and you can see the effects they're going for, and a lot of the effects mostly work. But there's this overall thing that you never feel like anyone's in any real danger. The only person of the main cast that I thought was in real danger was Cillian Murphy, who I thought there's a good possibility he will end up sacrificing himself for the daughter at the end. And in fact, he pretty much does.
Yeah.
And then the daughter's able to save him, so he doesn't die at the end. And that would be this reflection of what happened in the first film, and it's a quite deliberate one, because his family and his story is a reflection of the main family. He wasn't able to save his kids and save his family. John Krasinski was able to. He sacrificed himself. And then the daughter says to him, "You're nothing like him," and so on. And then this thing of kind of sort of becoming like him, or proving that he is like him, and so on and so forth. There's this whole
That's
thing
why I
about
thought
that.
they were brothers.
Yeah. So at the end, it would have made sense for him to die in service of saving the daughter. And, as you say, he aims at dying for her and doesn't manage it.
I mean, I think the film's idea of being progressive is to make the young girl the brains of the scheme of surviving, and to give her visually prominence at the end. Though, it's clear that the film even bends that a little. So, the film alternates between the boy doing that with his alien, the girl doing that with her alien. Yeah, so actually it's giving them almost equal prominence, which again, it needn't have done so, really. Though, the girl's given more visual prominence, which is interesting. On the other hand, I mean, I did think, like, the conceptualization of the family, it is very standard, conservative, maybe regressive. My remaining image of Emily Blunt is her crying, her caring. Yeah, it's a very stereotypical kind of mother role, really. And, the stranger comes in and he goes and gets all the action, right?
Yeah, I think it was at the end of that first film, there was actually, we remarked in the first podcast on the final shot of her with the shotgun and the family. It's like a badass mum thing,
Yes.
And she starts off this film in more or less the same way, because they're escaping from that exact situation that we've just finished off seeing in the first film, and they're moving on, they're trying to get to this location that they hope someone will be. And she's got the shotgun, and she's in charge, and then the kid gets caught in a bear trap, and so the aliens are after them, and she's panicking and stuff, but she's in charge of that situation, right? She's the mum, she's got the gun, and then they meet up with the old friend, who they realise is the old friend. The daughter goes off on her own, and the mum goes to Cillian Murphy, says, "Find my daughter," and that's kind of all she is left really to do in the film.
She also visits her first son's grave.
Yes.
So, again, it's really cliched. And it reminds me also that 2 members of the family died in the first film. And actually, that is also partly what made it so scary and, and so on. Yeah, that there was really, like you said, something at risk, something at stake in all of these actions. Whereas in this film, as it proceeds, you really do think no one is going to die. But maybe we focus too much on what we don't like about the film.
Well, I was thinking this when it came out of the film, it's going to be so easy to focus on the flaws because the film is not a shadow of what the first one was. And, at almost every point in the film I was thinking, oh, this is good, but... But the thing is, it is good.
Yes.
It's exciting. I wish there had been an audience there. We were the only 2 people in the cinema. We were seeing the film at 5:10. People weren't there.
Yes.
And, we're still in the throes of a pandemic, even though we're coming out of it and what have you. So, it's kind of fair enough that people weren't there. But
I was screeching on my own.
You were, yeah. And so, with a decent audience, the atmosphere may have been better. I think you're right that it's beautiful to look at, and not just the feeling of the image, as it were, but also the actual monsters. You see more of them this time. You get the feeling there's a bigger budget involved. The first one was such a success. The first film had about a $20 million budget and made $340 million worldwide. So, huge success. So, you've got more leeway the second time round, right? You get to see a lot more of the monsters, and for the most part, they're used very well. I mean, part of the thing that you often get with horror movies is the less you see, the more effective it is. The kind of the Jaws thing, right? And you had a lot of that in the first film. Here, you do get as you say, like the shadows or what's going on, the noises, but then more often than not, you see the monster, and they're right there. It feels more action-oriented for that reason. But I didn't mind that kind of shift in tone. I think the film is... Broadly, it's essentially reproducing what the first film did, as I suppose sequels tend to do. That's the whole thing of a sequel is, can we do the same again but different?
Yes, but so it does the same but different in a diminished way, right? Whereas there are other series of films where the sequels are just as good or even better, or so this really does feel like a step down.
Yeah, it does. But it's still good fun, and like I said, that slight shift in tone to a more action-y thing, I enjoyed. I think it leads to less tension. You get the feeling that people can fight their way out of situations more often, that sort of thing, and I guess the situations just feel a little less intelligently or creatively conceived. But I really don't mind it. It's a little bit like Sicario 2 was, if you remember. Sicario 2, if you compare it to Sicario, like the first one was really, truly brilliant, and the second film felt diminished and felt like almost a pastiche of what the first film was doing. But I really enjoyed Sicario 2. Well, it was terrifically engaging throughout.
Yes, it was.
But
I think this is, for me, even more of a step down.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, let's put it in perspective. It's a film that I enjoyed watching very much. I wasn't bored for a single minute. It really worked on me. I did screech throughout the film. But on the other hand, you come out and it feels unsatisfying, right? Like, for all the reasons that we mentioned, but also, in the first film, you thought there was almost like a real formal experimentation. Kind of, there were entire sequences that seemed entirely silent, right? That kind of, a lot of the scares and the effects and so on were coming out of the use of sound, which was kind of really interesting and unusual. And so kind of you come out of the film excited, for many reasons, including kind of formal inventiveness, right? Again, I didn't feel there was any of that here.
less inventiveness for sure. I think I think it still foregrounds visual storytelling brilliantly, right? The kind of central idea remains there. You can't make noise, and one of the main knock-on effects of that is you can't talk very much.
But even the film disobeys even that because there's a lot of whispering.
There's quite a lot of whispering. There's a lot of kind of incidental noises, and you do sometimes maybe feel like you wish you had a slightly clearer understanding of what noises were the most dangerous and what noises were okay to get away with.
Yeah, you said at one point, why don't they walk on the grass? I mean,
well, that's just at the start they come to the end of this silent path, and there's leaves, and so they go, okay, we'll walk very very carefully across the leaves. Yeah, dry leaves. That's right. So they're crunching away very slowly, and then you get this wide shot, and there's grass on either side. You go, well, walk on that.
It's so dumb.
Yeah. And that's not one of the film's most dumbest things, but it's just like it's a little bit like in the first one when they go to the waterfall. John Krasinski takes his son to the waterfall, and they can talk there because the waterfall is so loud it covers up the noise they're making. You go, why don't they live there? Yeah. Or at least why don't they go there when Emily Blunt's having the baby? Take a bit of a precaution. Instead, they set off fireworks, which whatever. And there are elements of people actually making stupid decisions in this. So, for instance, Millicent Simmons, the reason that she's gone off is because she's looking for this radio station that she's identified on this island. And because of her hearing aids, creates this feedback that can hurt the monsters or distract them. She goes, well, we can do this through the radio station. We can help a lot of people. So she goes off on her own, which is dumb thing number one. Then Cillian Murphy catches up to her, says, I'm going to take you home. But he doesn't. Dumb thing number two. There's no rush to get to that island, right? They could go home, regroup. In a film like this, in any horror film, characters splitting up is very, very common, and it very often works to heighten tension and stuff. But every time they do, it's a bad decision because there's never any good reason for it. It's always just people making stupid decisions, as they do here. They don't need to split up. They can go back, regroup, go as a group if they want to.
Well, I'm not sure about that because the mother and the newborn baby and the brother who's just had his leg caught in a trap.
Sure.
They
could at least talk it over.
Yeah. Well, actually, I think the talking it over is a good point because I do think that we as an audience are missing a lot of what I think of as vital contextual information, right? And I think, just a little conversation over the fireplace could have clued you in onto what's at stake in these decisions that they're making. What are their choices, right? So I do think that is a kind of a problem narratively. I think the film would have been more exciting if we knew more clearly what was at stake. I
do like the centering of Millicent Simmons' character, and I think she's a fantastic screen presence and a really good actress, and she completely carries that central. It is her central role. She's the main character, really. There's an ensemble thing going on, but she's at the core of it, and she's the driving force to get out to those islands and so on. And I think she's wonderful, and I like the film's dedication to putting her at the centre, where it would be so easy to put Emily Blunt at the centre with all the kind of stresses of taking care of her family and trying to fight and all that sort of stuff. So I think that's an interesting decision and a good one.
I want to go again about this casting of British actors or actors from the British Isles, because I know that it's a pet peeve and I'm like a broken record on this, and that really it bothers almost nobody else. But I do want to underline how I do see it as a problem, right? Because it's an American film representing America and talking about a way of conceiving an imaginary world, but that nonetheless is, the northeast of the United States. And, to be so easy to cast, another white Anglo-Saxon fair-eyed person in it, even if you have to import them from Ireland. The expense of casting the people who really do live there, right? I mean, the northeast of the United States has a huge Quebecois community. It has a huge Portuguese community. It has tons of Latinos of every origin. It has tons of black people. And yet you cast Gillian Murphy, and it's a problem.
I know. I think. Again, that's. We won't get into it too much. I think.
You can cut it out, but I think it's a problem.
No, I'm not going to cut it out. I think the thing for me is it's about, I suppose, picking.
It's white supremacist. It really is. I mean, it's unconscious, but it's white supremacist, really. In this instance.
I think, I think there's definitely, I mean, the kind of the whiteness in this film we have picked up on, and that's kind of, I think we're right to. I think the thing about casting European English actors in American roles, you do have a point. I think for me, it's more about picking kind of when it's most egregious and most offensive. I don't think it's at its most offensive in this film.
It isn't.
But it's one additional example.
Yeah, you're right. It's just that, kind of, you begin to see like this pattern in which almost America is erased in this vacuum of British actors kind of playing Americans. I think almost all of the most significant films that we've talked about recently, what was the one about the trial of...
Chicago 7.
There's the Chicago 7, then there's the one with the Black Panthers, then there's Promising Young Women, all British actors. And, kind of, they're all American films. They're all films set in America, right? Sometimes with really important historical figures. Right? It's
Nomadland, Minari. I mean, there are counterexamples.
Yeah,
and these are major films, Oscar nominated and so on.
Yeah,
it's not throughout all of them, right? But it's a trend.
Yeah, it's a problem. I do think that there is this erasure of what American actors can bring in terms of knowledge, sensibility, cultural memories. Yeah, what actors absorb through their life that they can then convey. I think American directors are doing a real disservice to American culture in this type of casting.
Can't say too much about Emily Blunt though, because she's his wife. She's John Krasinski's wife, and that's why she's in there.
Sure, and I don't want to be like what's the word?
Didactic?
Essentialist, or didactic, right? Because I mean, it's not an issue for me because this actor or that actor is cast, but when you see it time after time, it becomes a real issue.
Interestingly, though, Emma Stone played English in Cruella, which we recently saw, and you had a problem with the accent, and Celia, who's Canadian, had a problem with the accent. I had no problem with the accent. I mean, I thought this is theatrical, right? It's playing up. I thought that was completely...
Also, I mean, to say that Emma Stone is playing British, I suppose, but it's an American production. It's an American's idea of a cartoon character of a British origin. I think that type of casting is also very different, than casting a historical character with...
That's certainly true.
And were the situation to be reversed, I think British actors would be up in arms and British audiences would be up in arms. It happens very rarely the other way around, and whenever it does happen, there are discussions about it. So
can you think of an example? Are there Americans playing English in The Crown? Oh, John, who plays Churchill in The Crown? John Lithgow. He went down very well. People liked him.
People liked him. The Crown is an American production, isn't it?
I think so, yeah.
So, which I think is also kind of makes a difference.
Is it? So, in other words, if it's less egregious if America produces it and produces an English-based story in their own way, and if English people produced American-based stories with English actors, you go, well, it's English people, it's fine, they're doing their own thing. But if it's American casting English in an American story, then you go, why are you doing that?
Yeah, so for example, because a lot of Americans conceive of themselves as having a British background, right? So it becomes, that is also part of an American heritage, right? Which is not usually the other way around, right? But I think, Gwyneth Paltrow went down very well with her accent. Reese Witherspoon went down very well with her accent. And now I can't think of who didn't go very well.
It's funny actually thinking about Reese Witherspoon. Wait, is it Reese Witherspoon? Wait, which accent is that?
She played Becky Sharp in Vanity Fair, I think.
No, I'm thinking of Bridget Jones.
Oh yes,
that's not Reese Witherspoon.
So that I guess I know who you mean though.
I'm gonna have to look.
She's got that weird name.
Renee
Zellweger.
That's it. I always get her and Reese Witherspoon confused. Renee Zellweger, because I think her accent was terrific in that film. But I definitely remember at the time in the UK press there was why is an American playing this character?
Yeah.
It's kind of really big, well-known, successful novel, and why is an American got this role? And I think she ultimately kind of won people over, but certainly before the film came out, there was...
I think there were also issues with Meryl Streep playing Mrs. Thatcher.
Although that was not the only criticism that film took for its liberties with the truth. I mean...
Well, you know...
But, I mean, what's his name? Airy, was it? Who got blown up in the car, and she was there and ran outside and went, no.
What I'm trying to say is, you know, the very fact of casting Meryl Streep and Mrs. Thatcher led to a whole brouhaha here. Whereas Daniel Day-Lewis as Lincoln...
No, sure. Lincoln, the greatest president in the world, played by the greatest actor in the world. That was the narrative.
yeah.
You know? That was the narrative around it.
Well, that was the narrative.
And also directed by the greatest director in the world. It really had that feeling of, like, this is going to be the most important film of all time.
Yes, but the fact, you know, that he's British was not raised at all.
No, I think the fact he was British was part of it. I think. I do think America has definitely a view of British actors as better trained.
Well, I think it's a real disservice, and I think the reason why is because you have all these bloody rich directors, you know, who go to New York and who come to London and who see the plays, right? And that becomes the field of actors they're familiar with. And they never go to Milwaukee to cast anything, right? And I think it's a real problem because it erases all of those parts of American culture in the casting. You know, it erases what those actors can bring to a role that is uniquely of that culture.
What I would say as well, though, is that, you know, all the English actors getting the American roles, they're still basically the Eton set. Like, what we need is British actors from Newcastle and Liverpool getting those American roles. Then we will have real progress.
Yeah, right. Anyway, let's leave it. Do you want to add any last thing? Overall evaluation of A Quiet Place Part 2.
Very good fun. Worth seeing in the cinema, and it's a good thing the cinema was open for it. And in fact, it was interesting. This was pushed back for ages and ages because we're not going to make it a streaming release and so on. And actually, it ended up being pushed up. It came forward the release date when cinemas were looking at reopening and stuff.
And it's been a big hit,
which is interesting. Yeah, and it's been successful. And yeah, worth seeing. I liked it.
An inferior film to its sequel, but one that you know, I enjoyed watching very much. It really worked on me. And all of these issues and criticisms and so on, you know, that I have now are issues on reflection rather than in that moment when you're watching the film and kind of jumping out of your seat.
Yeah, you jumped a lot, and there's something to be said for that.
Yeah. Thank you very much for listening. We are Eavesdropping at the Movies, and we are on
Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, SoundCloud, and YouTube. On social media, we're on Facebook and Twitter, and the website is eavesdroppingatthemovies.com.
Thank you for listening.
Bye-bye.